Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 8-game college basketball slate. The second 4 games on this video will also be available for the second slate, which is a 4-game slate, so do keep that in mind. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. I'll try to do college basketball as much as I can, but it is hard as I do have to do a lot more research for it than basketball NBA, obviously, because there's less teams. And so with all the teams and stuff, it's a little bit harder, especially with injury information. But we do have a little bit of an injury report today for the Liberty FAU game. FAU is got Boyd questionable for the Creighton Oklahoma State game. Oklahoma State's Thompson is questionable for Texas State and Utah and Texas. Excuse me. Texas State's Turner is out and Morgan is questionable, and Utah's Dizu is questionable. So let's go ahead and get into the slate. I'll go through each game here and kind of give you what I think about the players on these teams. So we'll start with the Liberty FAU game. I do think this game is going to be pretty close. The line out is 144 total points, and the line is minus 7.5 in FAU's favor. I do think that that does give FAU an edge, and FAU does have several players that are definitely worth taking a look at. One being Davis, who has a 26 to 37 range in this game. I think he's a little bit overpriced, but he's definitely in play on this slate. Like I said, he's slightly overpriced, which is a little bit annoying, but he's in play as he has a high floor. Looking at Gaffney, he's also in play. He's actually got a pretty good floor for this game. He's only had 1 or 2 little bad games to start the season, but he's playing a lot more minutes now as he's entered the starting lineup, and he looks like a good play on the slate. And then Martin is also a decent play for the Owls as he's played pretty well the last few games as well, and his minutes have increased. And this is a good matchup for them in general. If Boyd was to play, that would definitely hamper a little bit here, but I do think that even if he does play, those guys will be fine. And it does look like Boyd might play. I would say Martin would take a pretty good hit, so keep that in mind. And Boyd would become a decent play if that was the case. As for Liberty, Matheny, Cleveland, and Pebbles are in play, but they have extreme risk on the slate. So they're really just high end, really risky GPP plays here. So only utilize those guys if you think Liberty can keep this game close, which it could be difficult for them to do. Looking at the Texas Tech Butler game, this has a total of 137 points and a spread of 2.5 points in Butler's favor. There's not a whole lot that I like from this game, but Joe Toussaint for Texas Tech has got the most potential in this game from his price range. He's a little bit overpriced, but he's been pretty safe throughout the start of the season, so I do like his potential. And he does get a lot of minutes, so he's definitely in play here. Uh, Outside of that, you could, stack Butler if you wanted to in this one, but this game is a lower scoring game than most of the other games on the slate, so it's a little bit easier to avoid. They don't have a lot of great value on either team. Looking at the UNC Wilmington versus ECU game, this is somewhat similar. It has a pretty low total at 140 points. It's also got a 1 point spread in ECU's favor. I felt like everybody on ECU is a little bit overpriced, and then for UNC Wilmington, White looks like a decent play here as he's been pretty good. Now, do keep in mind that he has apparently come off the bench so far this season, but his stats have been good, and he's got a pretty good floor for this game, around 24 points, 24 fantasy points. So, but he does seem to be a little bit scoring dependent at the very least, but he does seem to score a lot. So, I do think he's a decent play here, though he does carry a little bit of risk. Looking at the USF Hofstra game, this is an interesting game fantasy wise. Hofstra is favored to win by 5.5 points, and it has a pretty good ceiling, pretty good total at 147 points. When we look at Hofstra, we have a couple players that we do like, and Carlos being one of them. Though the defense here could be a little bit of an issue. I don't think that it will be though. Hofstra, he should be able to play well here, as he's got a pretty good ceiling for this game, and in the games like this, that he's done pretty well. The risk is if this was to get out of hand that he may not score as many fantasy points, but I think at least a 30 fantasy point game is doable for him. Looking at Duvar for them as well. He's also got some good potential in this one, though he's been a little bit streaky. He has some ups and downs, but his floor is pretty good here, and he's been good just about every game so far this year. And he gets enough minutes to be a playable play. Looking at Tyler Thomas, he looks like a great play as he's been really good so far this season. If you discount the first game of the year, he's been over 35 points in every single one, fantasy wise. So he's got a good potential here, and he's doing a lot of other stats as well, which is helping. He's also getting a lot of bucket opportunities, and this is a higher scoring game on the slate, so that gives him some potential. For Miguel for USF is also in play, but he is highly risky, and so he's mostly avoidable, but kind of a contrarian Hail Mary play if you want that. Looking at the Creighton Oklahoma State game, we have a couple guys from this team, these two teams that I do like. This does have an 8 point spread for Creighton, and it's a 142 point game. Now, for Oklahoma State, Bryce Thompson is questionable, and I don't think he's going to play, but if he does play, this isn't going to do too much to affect fantasy as he is a little bit risky, but and it doesn't really affect Oklahoma State too much because they're a little bit overpriced as they are. As for the players I do like from this game, Sherlerman sorry for butchering your name, for Creighton is the best option here. He's been pretty good so far this season. I do like his potential here, though he does have a lower floor than I like for the price, but he definitely has as much upside as anybody. And with them projected to win the game by about 8 points, he definitely has a lot of potential. Mason Miller for Creighton, also a good option here. Now, he only plays about 20 or so minutes off the bench, but he's played very well so far this season, and he doesn't need a ton of fantasy points to pay off. He can get around 15 to 20, and that will be fine, and he's definitely capable of doing that in this particular game. We'll also look at Keller for Oklahoma State. Now, he definitely draws some risk here, but he has some potential as he's only played in the last 2 games. If Thompson was to come back, I would probably fade him for sure, but I do think that Keller has some utility here as he's played very well despite only playing the last 2 games and has some potential here. So hopefully he's a good play on this particular slate. But again, he does carry some risk with the injury situation there and everything else. Looking at the State and Texas game, this definitely has some plays I do like. The spread in this game is 19.5 points in Texas's favor, and the total here is 137 points. But there are several players on Texas that definitely have some potential today, and we'll start with Abrams. Abrams here for Texas, as he's got a pretty good ceiling and a decent floor here. He's got a lower floor being as a blowout potential, but he has played well in all their blowouts so far this year as they've had 3, and so I do like his upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at Dylan Mitchell for Texas as well. Now he does carry a little bit more risk today, especially if Dizu comes back. But regardless if Dizu comes back or not, he's going to have some good potential for a 40 fantasy point game here. And then Shedrick, now he could be affected more if Disu does play, but again, we really don't have any clue if Disu will play or not. But he's had some really good games so far, and he's nice, priced really fairly. I do think he's a really solid price play on the slate. Excuse me. Looking at Texas State, we're going to look at Ogaro here at $6,100. He also has some potential here. His price is pretty good, and while he's only played, he's not had a single game under 20 fantasy points, but he does have a lower floor than I'd like, but based on the price. But he's going to get somewhere in the mid 20s probably, and even if the game's a blowout, he's been one of the safer players on the team. If Morgan was to play, he would definitely be somebody that would be interesting. As in the 2 games he did play, he's done well. And though one of those games was a loss and one was a win, he does carry some risk, but he should get a decent amount of minutes if he does play. And then Mason for Texas State also has some utility here, though he's only played in the last game. He did score 28 fantasy points, and he's shot quite a few basketballs, so he could be interesting, but he definitely carries some high risk from that as well. But he's definitely interesting. Sometimes getting guys from a game like this is kind of difficult, especially a losing team. But usually 1 or 2 guys do kind of go off, and I think that I've encountered the guys who I think have the most potential to do so. Looking at the Hawaii-Utah game here, this game doesn't have a lot of appeal in fantasy. That's an 11.5 point spread for Utah, 143 points total. I just felt like everybody in this game is a little bit overpriced, and there's not a ton of guys that are good at getting all the peripheral stats like we would like. I do think maybe the total is a little bit high. Then we'll look at the Oregon State and UC Davis game here, and we definitely have a couple guys I do like here. One being Akano for Oregon State. He's played pretty well so far this season. He had one off game, but I do think he's going to be fine in this one, and his price is pretty good. Somewhere between 20 and 30 fantasy point game potential. Billadou also has some upside in this matchup as he's played pretty well recently, though he had 2 a little bit rougher games and games that they lost, but they aren't expected to lose this game, and it's supposed to be closer. And if you look at the first 2 games of the season, they were closer games, and he played really well, so I think he's more likely to have a game like that. Looking at UC Davis, we do have one guy I like here, and that's Pepper, as he's played pretty well so far this season. Now, this game has only got a 2.5 point spread, so I look for him to continue how he's played this season, and he's averaging a pretty good high rate. Now, his floor is a little bit lower than I like at his price, but it's probably good enough that he's definitely worth a look. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing today. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.